We're going to wait a couple of minutes as folks sign in for the webinar. Numbers are rising.
Mhm. Okay, let's see. I think I could go through the housekeeping duties and we can get started while people are joining us. Hello, good morning, everyone. Depending on where you're located, of course. It's some early for some and not as early for others. My name is Megan Dotson, and I'm part of the National American Indian and Alaska Native Mental Health Technology Transfer Center. I'm the program manager there. And today we have Ray Daw with us and Charlene Pula, and we are collaborating on this project to provide you a wellness series. Signs and symptoms of depression is the topic of the day today. So we'll go through these slides real quick here. We're part of a network of regional offices throughout the country. We have a national coordinating office and a Hispanic and Latino MHTTC as well. You can see us located right here in the middle in Iowa, in Iowa City. We are funded by SAMHSA, of course, so we will be giving content in our own way as a presenter, and it's not necessarily going to be the opinions expressed by SAMHSA. They don't usually reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA, HHS, or the American Indian and Alaska Native MHTTC. Following today's event, you will receive an email that it'll include an evaluation. It takes about 2 minutes to fill out. And then if we decide to share the slides, we'll do that at that time. And since you've registered, we already have your email, so no worries there. We also have the recording going right now, so it'll be on our website later after it gets uploaded. So it's very important to our center that we acknowledge the land. And so we'd like to take this time to acknowledge the land and pay respect to the indigenous nations whose homelands were forcibly taken over and inhabited. Past and present, we want to honor the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to forever learn how to be better stewards of these lands through action, advocacy, support, and education. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced occupation of Native American territories, and we respect the many diverse indigenous people connected to this land on which we gather from time immemorial. While injustices are still being committed against indigenous people on Turtle Island, today we say thank you to those that stand with indigenous peoples and acknowledge that land reparations must be made to allow healing for our indigenous peoples and to Mother Earth herself. And this passage came to our center via 3 former members who are from the Meskwaki Nation here in Iowa. So we're doing this in collaboration today with the Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center. And they have a program in the Albuquerque Area Indian Health Board, and which is a tribally designated nonprofit organization established in 2006. They work with 27 American Indian tribes across New Mexico, Southern Colorado, and West Texas, providing high quality research, surveillance, and training to improve quality life of American Indians. They also offer diverse health promotion and prevention education programs, as well as specialized public health services. So the goal is to positively impact the well-being and health of communities that they serve. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Charlene Pula. I'm going to let her speak a little bit about herself, and we'll get started with the rest of our presentation with these great presenters today. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Yep.
All right. I'm at a workshop in Ignacio, so I'm trying to get the camera right. I don't know if this is working.
There you go.
All right. So good morning, everybody. Charlene Pula. I'm glad you guys are joining us today. We are going to be talking about signs and symptoms of depression. I work as Ray and Megan have mentioned, I work at the Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center, known as Aztec. And this series was really brought to you by tribes that we've been working with through a CDC grant. They really wanted additional training around mental health, signs and symptoms, suicide prevention, and intimate partner violence. So Megan and Ray have put a series together, as well as Daniel Foster. So welcome. I'm Hopi Tewa and Navajo. Home for me is First Mesa, Placa, Arizona. And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say at our training. Thank you.
So our other presenter, who is not able to be here with us today, his name is Dan Foster. Dan is an American Indian born and raised in the West. He served as an Army sergeant. He's graduated from Willamette University, then on to his doctor from Baylor. He received an MS in clinical psychopharmacology in 2011. And he was a collegiate, national, and international athlete. So we are blessed to know Dan Foster and his wife, Rebecca. They live in Montana, and we will see him on here later, I think, in the year throughout our series. And we just wanted to acknowledge that he has been part of the content and putting together these slides for us today. Thank you. So Ray, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I'm want to say a couple of things about Dan Foster. He will be joining us. He's liable to join us again today, but he's been very good about working with us on the content and planning for these sessions. So from Montana, I'm Navajo from living on the New Mexico side of the Navajo Nation and working as a behavioral health consultant across the spectrum of disciplines in our field, from prevention to treatment to intervention services. And been blessed to have teachers and mentors in my career that are been very good in guiding my experience and knowledge. But that's who I am. Grantees that are represented here largely are part of the 988 system that SHAR's been working with. The tribes that we're focusing on with these presentations are listed here. A couple of Apache tribes, a couple of Navajo communities, tribes, and a couple of Ute nations, and then 3 of our relatives from Pueblo country are here with us today. And I know from the participant list, we have folks from other parts of the Southwest and the country here with us. I want to welcome each of you here today. In this discussion we're going to have around depression. It is going to be a discussion because some of you are highly experienced clinicians, and some of us are also leaders and helpers in communities. And so we have a very diverse group. And so in putting together these, the content for the slides we have was our challenge to have a dialogue among us so that we can share our knowledge and the ways that are helpful for us individually. So thank you. Next slide, please. When you can, in chat, put down who you are and your ethnic affiliation. We have allies who are not native among us, and where you're from, and what your work is, and then also what this topic is of interest to you. This will help us, meaning Shar, Megan, and Dan, know you better, and then continue working on gearing our time with you in a more meaningful way. So we're here to talk about depression. and depression for me is synonymous with sadness, and has a lot of other features built with it, with depression. And there's no one, I think, who can say that at some point or time in their lives, our lives, that we haven't experienced depression, being depressed, being extremely sad, or being very sad, or and that's one of the natures of being a human being. If you are Christian oriented, and the Bible talks about times when the prophets and Jesus himself experienced moments of sadness, and our stories in Navajo, where we're told about the experiences our holy people have as they're going through their existence, feeling times of sadness, or not feeling well, being depressed. And that's how much of our ceremonies evolve from. But so this topic is a deep interest to all of us, particularly in the area of suicide prevention, because we see such problems among our people, especially our younger people, with suicide ideation attempts and deaths. And depression is one of the driving features of suicide. We also understand that depression is probably one of the two major emotional conditions that impact our people. There are studies that continually report this. Depression and anxiety are two of the major emotional problems that our people encounter, but not only our people, but other basically the whole world, particularly these times when we're having gone through about 3 years of a pandemic and unrest and uncertainty in our social political system. So it is not going to be unusual to have times of sadness, and some of that will come out in emotions of depression. So I wanted to begin with that discussion on how this topic is very important to us who work in our Native communities, with our families, and with each other. If you have questions or comments throughout as we go through this process, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as close as we can. Go ahead and take the next slide, Megan. We have an agenda, and I want to really thank Shar for laying out how we can do this process in a meaningful way. We did our welcome, we did our invitation, and we have why we're here, and we have a large audience today, and I'm very happy to see that. So we're going to have a discussion around your individual understanding of depression, and then go through the DSM-5 criteria for depression, and have a dialogue around experiences of depression and a couple of case studies at the end. So that's how we're going to go through this training that we have today. Thank you. Next slide. Char, do you want to add anything?
No, I think everything's good. I'm really interested in the case studies to hear people's perspective on it. So
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to discuss depression with you, and we're going to ask you to share your knowledge and experiences with this uh, topic. And so we're going to have a little bit of dialogue and ask for a couple of participants that are here to raise your hand or unmute yourself and discuss with us some of the questions that we have. And also to put into chat some of the responses that you'll have to some of the comment areas that we've put together. Next slide, please. So we're going to discuss ways of understanding depression. And these are the 4 objectives that we have for this time we have. Next slide, please. And we're going to have this discussion on depression. Next slide, please. So I'm going to ask you to have a dialogue with us and with each other. What is your understanding of what depression is? Anybody would like to share your thoughts about that? If not, then put some comments in chat. I'll share that if you feel like unmuting and sharing what your understanding of depression is, please say so. I mentioned earlier that we're in the 3rd year of going through a pandemic, and in the winter season is a particularly tough time for many of us because of the cold weather and the diminishing time. We basically have less time to go out and do outdoorsy kind of things in the winter. If you're a hiker, for example, like I am, then we don't get a chance to slip through the mud. We don't do that. And during the last 3 years, we've experienced a lot of instances of feeling sadness because of the problems we've had with relatives, friends, and family members losing lives. Julio mentions that depression is a mental illness that seeks to impair a person in each aspect of their life. That's a very good comment, Julio. And how does that appear? Well, yeah, Andrea, depression is different for everyone. We're looking at chat.
Ray, this is Charlene.
Sure.
This topic came up because some of our sub-awardees were talking about how, this year we're re-engaging in our traditional doings and meeting up with families for celebrations now. And there was a sense of sorrowness when we were gathering and a sense of sadness because some of our family members weren't there. Normally would be there, and so that kind of grief, I guess, might have been they've been feeling, but also where they were trying to decide grief or is this sadness, this depression. So they were kind of going back and forth, and it stayed with them, that sense of sadness for more than a few weeks. That's why this topic came up.
Yeah. There's real major overlap between grief and sadness and depression. They're kind of synonymous, and I think we can all relate to the, especially the 2 years that we had to socially isolate. We can all relate to how that affected all of us, and that's carried on with many of us to continue to socially isolate in varying degrees. So that we are a lot more careful with where we go and how we interact with general public, if not that, and families. There are a couple of things that have happened. There's been a major shift in Native country the last few years. And this contributes to what we're talking about today's depression, and also contributes to what Shar is talking about around grief and sadness. Native American life expectancy has dropped by 5 years in the last half decade. That is a major change in Indian country around how we perceive ourselves, how our mental well-being is going to be, how our emotional well-being is going to be, and how it affects, like somebody mentioned, affects many aspects of who we are. So the CDC reports this 5-year drop in life expectancy among Indian country has happened and is happening right now. And there are a lot of factors that relate to that. One of them is, of course, the pandemic, and the fact that we have had many of our relatives move on from this world to the other, and leaving us with feelings of loneliness and unsettled. Candace, can you explain your comment about Navajos would consider this as a monster or an illness?
Hello, can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think where I'm getting this information is from our stories,
Mhm.
our traditional stories, and how there's some sort of like positivity to it, resilience.
Mhm.
And then there's also the opposite end of say monsters that overcome our lives.
Mhm.
And in our Navajo, we have Navajo deities and Navajo traditional songs and prayers and stories that note that. And a lot of my reference is coming from the Diné Action Plan.
Mhm.
And so they tell stories about changing a woman and the two monsters
Mhm.
are the two sons that she had, and so monsters Naye consists of depression, poverty, violence, substance abuse, and just a lot of things that affect our lives today.
Mhm.
And so, which is just something that
Mhm.
when I participate in ceremonies, that's what they talk about.
Mhm.
And so that's what supports, I guess, a lot of our traditional way of living.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that and that teaching with us there, and how in the Navajo we do have that process of engaging with each other, circumventing the problems and conditions that come with being affected by these monsters. And many of our tribal ways, traditional ways in our languages, as I think about that word depression in and of itself, it was not named like that. So thank you for your story. Anyone else have comments regarding your understanding of depression, or as Candace did, share with us how in your tribal ways depression may be discussed or described? continuing on from Candace's description of Naye, back in the day when the two warriors were in the process of cleansing the world of monsters that existed and these monsters were actually taking lives of people. They were killing people. And the two warriors came to a place where they could begin to save lives by killing monsters. But at the end of it, some of the monsters, Naye, said, don't kill us, because some of us can have a purpose. And some of the monsters made agreement with the two warriors that they could stay on this world, the Naye, and have presence, and through that presence remind people of how special life is, and to be able to be around on this earth so that we as a people could circum them, and can remind us that we can have good lives, and we do have purpose. So these other monsters that were left to be around, like sadness, hunger, envy, all these adverse negative feelings and emotions that come around to us and we experience, can be still with us. That's basically so the Naye are always around us, and that's a teaching around that. The teaching around Naye isn't that they're to be respected in a way that we take care of ourselves, and to continually to practice prayer, songs, and ceremonies to be able to be resilient and persevere through the feelings and thoughts that the Naye bring upon us. And that's a Navajo teaching. So I think that in a Navajo way, it's less about being a victim, it's more about being resilient and persevering through the challenges that happen in life, because Naye, they're continually to be fully grounded with the teachings that are given to us by relatives. Anyone else have any comments related to these 2 points, or these 2 questions? Okay. It's a heavy topic, that we realize that, and it's the reason why we decided to put this on one of our first areas of discussion with you. Next slide, please. Quiet group here. We're gonna have a little some discussion about the DSM-5-TR. The DSM-5-TR was released last year, so it's a very new publication from the American Psychiatric Association. I imagine that many of you who are clinicians are working on shifting from the DSM-5 to the DSM-TR, because there are some changes in there that are pretty interesting, and in terms of how we work with diagnoses and begin to treat the conditions that are identified with the DSM that way. So we're going to go through some parts of the DSM-5-TR and the next slides are coming up. Go ahead, Megan. The slide before that. Whenever, as Native clinicians, And particularly if you're grounded within the spiritual ways, there's always this back and forth around the Year American system, which is really the DSM system, and then the ways of our people, which is through medicine and through the ceremonies that we have. It's a process of not necessarily giving and taking, but beginning to understand how each can have a role in the work we do as Native American providers. And because not every Native American person is going to respond, have resonance to, or feel a connection to the, like in our case, the Navajo way. Our Native American society isn't like that, especially with over 70% of our people living in urban communities, away from largely traditional practices and ceremony, tribal traditional practices, ceremony. And there we have this process of acculturation that is really wide. And it becomes important to understand both systems, I think. And as a clinician, particularly working in Native American country and urban country, and New Mexico, particularly because we have a lot of our people like living in Albuquerque and who migrate back and forth to tribal lands. I have family in Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, Santa Fe, who come back home a lot and seek support and from Navajo practitioners. And that's how our lives are in New Mexico. So it's, on the other hand, I have relatives who are very acculturated and assimilated into the American way. That's where the DSM-5 TR would come in as a more handy tool, I think. And so we have this balance that we end up seeking to achieve. And our non-native relatives, I think, who work with our people have that challenge too. And the good thing about our non-native relatives, many of them that I've met, is that they look to understand and incorporate or even refer native relatives for native interventions when they can. It's pleasing to see how most native programs in New Mexico have built into their systems traditional healing as a big part of their service delivery systems. And I think that's how we acknowledge the two ways of helping. And that's why this slide is valuable to me, at least, is that yeah, we have a very grounded and empirically based system like the DSM-5 TR. We also have the same kind of empirically grounded effective system that's built within our tribal ways. And as empirically grounded as the DSM system is, we're now in the second version of the DSM-5. So it's a work in process within the DSM system to make it more relevant to populations. And the DSM-5 TR actually, there's a little more attention to social, cultural impressions, which is a major move by the American Psychiatric Association. Next slide, please. So what are depression criteria? Well, in the DSM-5 TR, there isn't that big of a change in the criteria for diagnosing depression. And here's a listing of what symptoms are looked for when moving towards whether a person can be diagnosed with a depressive disorder. You know, it basically changes in behavior. You know, appetite, insomnia, hyperinsomnia. Insomnia is not sleeping well, lack of sleep. And hyperinsomnia is kind of the opposite of that. So it's really interesting that you can have a sleeping problem, which is you sleep too much or not enough. And so presents a challenge when you're doing an assessment around that. Psychomotor agitation or retardation, another thing, like two ends of a spectrum in terms of movement. You either get depressed and get hyper with it, get agitated with it, or you get depressed and you slow down a lot. You don't do things that you would do. And there's fatigue and loss of energy. There's feelings of guilt, worthlessness that come with depression. Difficulty in thinking, concentration, and making decisions. And another symptom that's looked for, that we're encouraged to look for when doing a depression assessment, is around suicidal ideation or suicide attempts. So this is something that we look for when working with our people. Next slide, please. If you have any comments, please let us know. Taking time to explain some of those symptoms, because we have people on the call who are not grounded in DSM ways as others might be. Understand we have some elders and people from some of the tribal communities with us today. What have been some of the changes to the DSM-5 from the DSM-5? Well, in the middle of this chart, there's depressive disorders. It's not a lot of change in terms of symptomology or symptoms, but more changes around how diagnoses can be made, depression diagnosis can be made with psychiatric disorders. I think there's an attempt to make them more connected. And there's a listing of some of the assessment instruments that are recommended for diagnosing depression. There's 2 instruments there. And the impact that this change in the DSM-5 has made is described as not having a major impact on those assessment instruments. They're still relevant that way. Related to depression are some other mental health conditions that can appear, like PTSD, and one of the major symptoms that are described in the DSM-2R and DSM-5 actually is suicidal behavior and non-suicidal self-injury. So these are a review of how some of these modifications that come into the DSM-5 look when we take the DSM-5 and make a quick comparison. Any questions on this or any comments related to this? Anybody? I imagine all the clinicians that are on board with us have adapted to the DSM-5 Any comments, anyone?
May I say something?
Yes, please.
I'm Julio. I've out of University of Wyoming in Laramie. I had a question regarding Eurocentric compared to more traditional Native explanations of illness. So when diagnosing, and I get that Native folks aren't all the same or anything, are there any general ways to describe with respect to a native understanding of mental illness to describe depression or something like that to a person that doesn't have much experience with the DSM?
Mm, mm. It's a really good question. I think that relates to I think your question leads to a discussion around how tribes within the tribal linguistic system describe these kind of feelings like sadness, or grief, or pain. All of our tribal languages have very rich descriptions of the feelings and thinking that can come from not feeling well. And I mentioned earlier that in New Mexico, at least, and I know in Montana, this is fairly heavily too, is that we have traditional healing components programs, and pretty much most health and behavioral health programs in Indian country. And when a question like yours comes,
Like Ray froze, because I can see you guys still moving, so let's give it a second. Shar, can you jump in at all?
what happened?
Oh, wait, there you
Oh,
are.
you froze.
You
Okay.
froze.
We
Well,
get
you tell us, Ray, what did happen?
so the quick answer to your question is basically consult with a Native American practitioner. And if you have a Native American practitioner in Montana who is from a particular tribe, and you're working with a client or a patient, Native American healers who can be very good about doing that. And quite a few Native American providers who have experience within tribal systems. You mentioned Doc Foster earlier. He's very well grounded within the Lakota way, but also has a lot of experience with tribes of Montana. And so that'd be a way to approach it, I think. Did I answer your question?
Yes, I got it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Anyone else have comments or thoughts? Okay. Hearing none, let's move on. Next slide, please. So this the source for this slide is medlineplus.gov, which is a really well-grounded federal website. And Medline Plus basically points out that there are different types of depression. There's just not, when we talk about depression, it's not just one thing. It can show up in different ways. Major depression, it's where you see those symptoms that we lined out earlier become a lot more noticeable, and a lot more can be very serious or very severe. And the duration, or the amount of time that someone can have these kinds of symptoms, if they're at least 2 weeks, then can be described as major depression. Persistent depressive disorder, also known as dysthymia. In this form of depression, the symptoms are not as severe as major depression. They're not serious or severe, but they can last a little bit longer, like 2 years. This is when our discussions around grief and and mourning can come in, I think, is we have discussion about grief and mourning and adverse childhood experiences or historical trauma. I think this is where some of those feelings of depression can show up. There's a little more attention and acknowledgement towards seasonal affective disorder, which is what happens with a lot of our people right now.
in Northwest.
And is a very, very real problem. There have been studies that indicate that seasonal affective disorders, the problem with seasonal affective disorder as a condition shows up a lot more heavily as they move up more into the northern part of the hemisphere. The more north you are, the more likely you'll see more instances of seasonal depressive disorder. Not only in terms of incidence, but also in terms of severity and duration. And so there have been some very nice studies around seasonal affective disorder. Then you have postpartum depression, which is a condition that that our ladies can experience in different ways. But these are the four types of depression that are acknowledged within the field as being significant to be alert to. And the work I've done with particularly northern communities, we tend to have more deep and serious discussions around seasonal affective disorder as a major contributor to the emotional problems that might be happening in those northern communities. So I think it's a problem to really begin to pay attention. I'm really glad that NIMH in particular acknowledges seasonal affective disorder as being important. Any comments on this by anybody? For non-clinically grounded people, seasonal, as you know, in our tribal ways, we have different ways of describing these conditions and different ways of remedying and healing from these conditions that come up. And because they're so tribal specific, it's really difficult to say what they are within the communities that Shar is working with, especially. That's more of a intertribal discussion, I think. So let's move on to the next slide. A really good change, I think, within the DSM-5-TR is a new, basically a new diagnosis, prolonged grief disorder. Is acknowledged within the American Psychiatric Association's new version of the DSM-5. And this is what the American Psychiatric Association is how they describe prolonged grief disorder. I thought this would be good to put into our slide set for depression because grief and depression just kind of go together. They go together, and it's important. I thought it would be valuable for us to know that this diagnosis is now the DSM-5-TR and available to us to make diagnoses with and to begin to work on ways to help our family members and relatives who are going through this condition. And honestly, a lot of us are having to do this right now. Um, so with that, I'd like to have some of you share with me what your experience is with depression screening. Screening is formal interviewing and a testing process. It's just basically not it's not assessment. Assessment is when you take a deeper dive into interviewing to be able to make a diagnosis or be able to make a strong clinical judgment. What are some of the screening tools that you use in your settings, those of you that are doing clinical work? If you want to put them in chat, go ahead and put them in chat. Yeah, the PHQ-9 and the CCAPs. Within the IHS system, the PHQ-9 has been widely adopted. In some settings, is the first instrument of choice for screening. Beck's inventory. Thank you, Nelda. It's good to see you here. Yeah, what other screening tools might be available to you or that you use in your work? So we have 3 listed right now. Okay. Well, from the quick responses that we have, it seems like the PHQ-9 is a more widely used screening instrument out there. And that's not a surprise because it's been a major move by Indian Health Services, SAMHSA, and INMH, and NIDA, for example, to have stronger application of that screening tool, the PHQ-9. So it's good to see that much of the work made by these agencies is having effect that way. Next slide. So achieving balance from depression. We have a major tool available to us, and I'm really grateful that SHAR has been able to pull together 9 Native communities in Mexico to really look at how to apply 988 into the health delivery systems, behavioral health systems within those 9 communities that are out there. 988 has become in my feelings, that 988 is a major tool we have available to us in our Native communities to be able to begin to open the doors for our relatives to have someone to speak with, particularly with relatives who are having depression and isolating from family or community, which is, remember, one of those features of depression is not being out and about as as they sometimes can be because of fatigue or loss of energy or just major changes in appetite. So I thought this would be a good time to offer that that 988 is a I think a significant advance in the field, but also significant advance for those of us that are working in behavioral health to be able to give an option to our relatives to be able to seek help. The not able to or can't because of life circumstances. In New Mexico, like a lot of you know, we've been doing a major campaign around putting out information around 988 and have tools available. You see in my background, one of the tools that are made available on the website towards giving information about 988. There are websites, native websites and native Facebook pages related to 988 that are out there that you can look at and download graphics and information. I use this 988 banner as my graphic for all my webinars. And this balance that we have, and this drawing that you're seeing next to the 988 poster is a graphic that was drawn by Medicine Man Ataki. And his description of moving from an imbalanced, dark way of being to a way of being that is not as dark. And doing that through ceremony, prayer, and herbal medicine. In our Navajo way, we use traditional tobacco as one of the major medicinal ways to clear our minds and to clear our thoughts and our feelings, so that we can be not as impacted by the Naye or the monsters that can interfere in our lives if we don't address it. There's a question there, Megan, on what is the training, what is the webinar ID? Can you put that in? Miranda's moving to her iPhone.
Okay, let me look it up.
Yeah, so we'll get that to you, Miranda. Okay, thank you for your comment and joining us here on the off your phone. So this is how balance can begin to be achieved, particularly with our relatives that are out there. And we have data from New Mexico that indicate that out of all the calls that are going into the 988 system right now that are New Mexico based, that Native American people are making more calls to the 988 system in proportion when compared to other ethnicities in the state. So we're seeing good use by the 988 program by Native Americans in New Mexico. Next slide. Yes, the video will be posted on the website, Kelsey. So in chat, or a couple of you can unmute and describe what are some behavioral signs that you see with depressed clients? Anybody? Lack of participation. Yeah. I think what you mentioned, Tanya, is really, really important. And one of the difficulties that we have with putting into radio or media public information is when we tell people, if you're feeling very sad, come see us, kind of thing. Encouraging people to see us in behavioral health programs or outreach programs when they're feeling very sad or isolating, and that's not congruent with what you're talking about, lack of participation in life. folks who are seriously or severely depressed aren't going to be out and about the way we want them or with the way we think that they can be or should be. And so we have this disconnect. And this is why I think the 988 system is a really good tool, because people who are severely depressed or seriously depressed because they're not participating in life can pick up a phone and or go online and have a dialogue with a clinician on the other end of a 988 line. So thank you for that. Yeah, Tamara, you're right about lack of confidence. There's a tendency to isolate. Yeah, melancholy. Or Linda, Yate, Deja. Mhm. And Marie also mentions isolation. Thank you for your comments. What are some of your American ways? What your American ways exist to help someone coping with depression? Anybody want to make comment to that in chat or unmute?
I
What was the
can-
question?
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Go ahead and ask your question.
I'll go ahead and go. So
Yeah,
your
Mhm.
American ways would typically be like things like cognitive behavioral therapy or ACT therapy, trying to detach from unhelpful thoughts, things like that.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking this morning that we have a wide array of tools available to us to build a real diverse set of skills. And that's the nice thing about the behavioral health field today. There are a lot of ways to help people deal with those experiencing depression. So thank you for your comment. And many of our communities have local resources identified to help folks who are experiencing depression. I oftentimes go out to veterans meetings or community meetings, and I see material out and about in Native communities related to PTSD or giving information on local behavioral health programs that are out there. So it's been nice to see. The other thing is that among the local resources we have is social media. You know, almost all programs that I know about that are in Native country or non-Native country have social media presence, and some are very good about giving out information, tools, doing talking circles, or making available educational sessions. Navajo Behavioral Health Program, for example, has been doing weekly webinars for the last couple of years on a whole slew of topics, and that's all on Facebook. So there are these tools, resources, and tools that are available to us. I think that we can look to steering, and apps too. Yes, there are apps that are available to us. New Mexico has a couple of really good apps that are available for consumers, clients, and providers related to seeking help and getting information on where to go, or even some tools around how to do self-screening tools. So thank you for that comment, Andrea. Mobile crisis teams, yep. Some communities are busy working on mobile crisis team development, and some have implemented mobile crisis teams. New Mexico, I think, we have 4 tribes that are actively working on creating mobile crisis teams, and a couple that have active mobile crisis teams. In non-native settings, Las Cruces is one of the communities that is now recognized as having a very active mobile crisis team system in place. So that's their, part of the 988 system. Next slide, please. So we started the discussion with a presentation discussion with a graphic on depression. And one of the things that's coming out, I think, and once again, I'm glad that DSM-5TR acknowledges how complex depression can be. And I really thinking very positively about the new diagnosis they're putting out around grief, prolonged grief. And that's an example of how depression can be very complex and very complicated to work through, identify, work through, and help people with. So it's a nice, nice chart, I think, that depicts that. Next slide. So we have a couple of case studies that we're going to look at and close out with. Shar, you want to go through this, please?
Yeah, I can. I have to, okay, let's see. I'm doing this on my phone. So we did a youth case study, and then we did an adult case study.
Mhm.
And as most of you know, as clinicians, the way we learned in graduate school was to, always identify the signs and symptoms of whatever disorder we were going to look at. And in this case, it's going to be depression, and identify the signs and symptoms in case studies, and really start asking ourselves, do they meet the criteria for depression or for anxiety? And so this was one case study I wanted to share with you all so that we could have a dialogue. I know it's already 10:13, so we may not get to the adult case study, but this is a good one that involves a family. So the youth is 13 years old, male, 8th grade student. Youth was referred due to teachers' concern about his academics. Father was hospitalized for 2 months due to COVID. Due to the hospitalization, the father lost his job, and the family eventually lost their home. And during the father's hospitalization, the youth's mother left the family. So this young person stayed with distant relatives, and the father was released from the hospital. The youth and his father then moved to Albuquerque and are currently homeless. The father has reported that his son does not want to go to school. And at the school, the youth is failing some of his classes. Teachers are concerned. The youth prefers to be alone, does not want to engage with peers or other teachers. The youth has reported that he always feels tired. Even if he gets a full night's sleep, he's still tired. He's reported that he sometimes feels, lonely about his mom leaving, and that he has no contact with her. He shared that he has a close relationship with his father, reported that it's difficult to focus on schoolwork, reports he does not like to play any of his video games, which he used to enjoy, or draw as much as he used to, and that he often sleeps a lot during the day. His strengths are that he is an avid reader, tests at the college level for reading, and enjoys playing the guitar. So in your opinion, based on what you've learned thus far, what are some signs or symptoms that you see is going on with this young person? And you can unmute. Just make sure, how many people do we have left? 38. So there's 38 people. What are some signs and symptoms that you see? Yes, I can.
So disinterest with school, or sleep, and it seems like the depression is impacting the ability to learn, because he is, from the last lines, a pretty bright person, but yet the depression is really inhibiting his way to function academically and probably socially too.
Mhm. Exhaustion is another one I just saw. Isolation. Thank you for sharing. You're right on. So do you see how some of these signs correlate with the signs and symptoms that we learned early on? There's those signs, but what else is going on in the family that you could see could be impacting this young person's well-being?
Well, him and his father are now homeless.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's gotta be hard on both of them.
Mm-hmm. That lack of stability, yes.
Mhm.
Mother's not present, of course, in a young person's life. You know, you always would like to have both parents. Yeah. Don't know where the mother's at. I don't know at this point. I'm assuming the father has gotten his job, got a new job after he got out of the hospital. But it's just to demonstrate that a lot of our families are probably facing this situation that this young person is going through. And especially those who live in urban areas, right? We know the data shows that about 70% of people are now, American Indians are now living in urban areas, because, you know, that's where most of the employment is. There's employment on the reservation, but some people may be living on an urban area and then going back to the res for work too. So with this going on with the family, and you see the signs and symptoms going on at school, what do you think might be the missing link for this young person? What do you think would be some good interventions, supports that this young person, if you had this case, what could you do to assist this young person? What do you think? I know for me, working in schools, most of my career, I've worked in school mental health, school-based health centers. The one thing I always try to do is bring the family together, to allow this young person to know that they are loved and supported. And sometimes people don't, young people don't hear that as much because there's adults are so consumed with the problems and stressors that they're going through that they sometimes forget about, you know, that support they need to provide to their middle schooler because they think, oh, well, they can cook and clean. They don't need me as much, but they really do need us during their adolescent development. That's the most important time, one of the most important milestones in development, because they're learning how to become an adult, right? So I always bring the family together, do a session with the family, and then I also invite other family members who the youth thinks is important to be there. This is for me to demonstrate to the youth, you have a right to say who you want in your life and who you feel has your back. And so for me, that's giving them the empowerment to say, hey, I want auntie or uncle here, or I want my cousin here, so that they're a part of the conversation and that this young person knows they at least have, you know, at least one adult, but usually it's more than one adult, at least a few people in their lives that want them to stay connected to the family and want to, you know, just give them the love and support they need to get through this difficult time in life. So that's one thing I would do. What are some other things you guys would recommend?
Oh, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I was just wondering about the closeness of the friends, if there was a lot of friends in the area, if they can, you know, just as a big group, support the child and the father, perhaps, you know, see what they might help with as a community and see how they can support the next person, that type of thing. I'm not sure how close this place is, but if it's close enough, then maybe you could help them out with maybe a garage to sleep in for the time being or a spare room or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. A place where they could stay until they get on their feet, right? Yep. Good idea. Anyone else? What are some of the strengths you see? Besides the one listed that he's an avid reader and that he tests at the college level and enjoys playing the guitar. What are some strengths that you see in this case study? Relationship with father. Yes, he has a strong relationship with the father. There's that bond, right?
Mhm.
That's important. There's that bond.
Mm.
Okay.
I think,
Any
I
other?
think- yeah, I think one of the strengths that I see in the case study is that the youth recognizes that he is experiencing some difficulty with schoolwork, and he's not playing video games or drawing like he used to. So he's recognizing some challenges at the onset.
Yes, he is. But also that he's seeking help, right? The
Mhm.
teacher referred the student to get some support. So that's good. We might be able to do the adult case study. I thought
Yeah, we
you
could
guys are quick. All right, let's go to the second one. Let's see. All right. I'm about to zoom in. Mom came in for services to get benefits, food stamp benefits for the family. She's 38 years old with 3 children. Oldest daughter's 13, son's 10 years old, youngest daughter's 7. Her boyfriend of 11 years left her in the family wherein he lost his job due to drinking. She has tried to contact him several times to ask for support for the younger children, but no luck. They have been separated for 8 months now. Mom works full-time, rents a 2-bedroom apartment. The last 3 months she's paid rent late because most of the money is going towards food because food costs so much more now. Her car broke down and all of them must take city transportation. Her family lives on the reservation and they cannot financially help her because she's in an urban area. She often cries at night because she does not know how they'll make it. She's constantly tired and worries endlessly that she doesn't want to eat because of this worry. She's not sleeping well, has isolated herself from friends because she does not want to be a burden. She used to like to go to the park with the kids and walk. Now she cooks dinner and goes straight to her bedroom. When asked how is she dealing with the stress, she states, "I don't know, I'm happy and tired." She's been feeling this way for the last 2 months. So once again, based on what you've learned, what are some signs and symptoms you see in this case study? We still have 37 participants. You all are quiet.
May I go ahead?
Sure.
So this isn't a symptom of depression, but the thing I'm most concerned about is the concern about being a burden. That oftentimes people that feel like a burden or burdensome oftentimes think about suicide afterward. So I'd be worried about suicide with this person.
Exactly. Right. And she's isolating herself. People are talking about the tired, the fatigue, the anxiety, the isolation. So if she came to your office and she told you this, would there be another additional screen or how would you approach this? Knowing that you're concerned about suicide ideation.
With this adult, the PHQ-9 would be fine. But for this person, I would just directly ask, and then I would probably use something off that's free, the Columbia Suicide Screener.
Mhm.
And then ask about what sources, what are the most pressing concerns right now. It looks like financial plus much emotional health too. But I imagine the person will probably feel somewhat less stressed with a more supportive financial space. Still, our heart's probably still pretty broken considering was in a really deep relationship, and then all of a sudden that changed. That's got to be a lot to deal with. Plus, raising 3 kids, that's just a lot of energy and a lot of time, and the person's feeling really tired a lot of the time. So I'd be really worried about how the person's going to get through the next month or 2.
Exactly. Right. So this person if you were to go from like low, moderate, or high, where would you rate the risk here?
Probably moderate, I would think.
Okay.
If the person said, yes, I'm thinking about killing myself, then it would be higher, but that's not present here. But after assessing and asking, then I would probably rate her higher at that point.
Okay. So in this case, right, mom really needs that financial support, right? So figuring out what is she eligible for, applying for EBT, yes, food stamps would be very helpful. What other things could she apply for financially you think that she might be eligible for? If you're living in the city, what do you think? TANF, yes. Small grants. What about, it starts with an H. Housing, yes, HUD. Housing assistance, right? Rental assistance. See if she's eligible for that. If you were to provide some of these resources, what do you think that would do for mom? Relieve her stress, right? Reduce the stress a little bit so that she can focus on her kids. And do you see how sometimes there might be signs and symptoms of depression, but if we don't get the full story, we're not going to be able to assist? So maybe in this case, we know there's a lot of financial stressors, and maybe alleviating and providing supports for those financial stressors will allow mom to focus on, okay, is this stress? Is this depression? Is it a broken heart? Like, it's going to help her to focus on her well-being and sort through how can I move forward and really be present for my children, right? So, so we have to get the full picture when we're working with our clients and not just see signs and symptoms. There could be other things going on in their life that we're not aware of. So it's really important to sit down and hear their story, I guess, is the gist of this.
Yeah. I think engaging a peer support provider would be available also too.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments about the case? I know it's 10:28. I want to be mindful of people's time. And I would have my camera on, but I'm on my phone and I don't know how to do it the portrait way. I have it the landscape way. I don't know if that makes sense. So I saw something in chat. It's important. I don't know. I didn't see that last one. Ray, could you read that?
It is, yeah, Nelda from Tuba City mentions that it's important to ask how they have been managing so far and what coping skills they've been using the last 3 months, for instance.
Yeah, perfect. Those supports, right? What are the resiliency factors? Awesome. Any
Great.
other questions, comments? No? Well, thank you for joining us. I know Megan put in the link for the evaluation. I'm going to turn it over to you, Ray. Thank you, guys.
Very good case studies. Thank you, Shar, for providing it. Shar came up with the case studies, and we're going to continue working on including them in the future sessions that we have. The next session in April is going to be around signs and symptoms of anxiety, and you'll see what that'll cover there. For that session, we have a few more coming up after that, but just to give you a look at the calendar, we encourage you to continue joining us and participating in these sessions that Shar and Megan have kindly set up for us to spend time together.
Ray, got a question. Will the format be similar like this was?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so everybody needs to drink more coffee and not be so quiet, right?
Exactly.
Well, like, you know, within Native American country, people have a lot of respect for each other. So, you know, we tend to kind of hold back a little bit.
Yep.
And so I take that as a sign of respect and whatnot. But so join us next time for the sessions that are scheduled to be coming up. And we encourage you to think about how we can approach. If you have thoughts about the next topic, anxiety, you know, feel free to send it to us. Next slide, please, Megan.
Okay.
Next slide. If you have thoughts about the session coming up, you know, if there are things you're particularly interested in hearing about anxiety, send your comments to either Devana, who works with Shar, or Megan, who works with Dan and I, and we'll work at incorporating questions you might have or suggestions you might have related to anxiety in the next session. We intend this to be interactive, not us talking to you, and having a learning community that way. So I want to encourage that of all of us that are here. Any closing comments, Shar?
No, thank you guys for joining us, and I hope to see you at our next session. And thank you, Ray and Megan, for organizing and coordinating this session.
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and for
Yeah.
the opening, Ray, thank you for doing a blessing.
So we'll close this out. Everybody have a good week, a good day, and take care of yourselves. Okay, and we'll see you. We will see you next month. Yeah, gonna.